Hello and welcome to today's panel talk, RC Experts Migrating SAP to Microsoft Azure. My name is James Linnane, I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined by a panel of industry experts. So I'd like to introduce the gentlemen on the call today. Firstly, I'll go along to our Microsoft representative, Pankaj.
Thank you, James. My name is Pankaj Meshram. I am a SAP Cloud Solution Architect working for Microsoft UK. I've been in the SAP space since quite a while. So I've worked with Atos, HP in the past, and been with Microsoft for about close to 2 years. I work with all the partners based in the UK to grow and transform their SAP on Azure practice.
Thanks, Pankaj. And we'll go over to Sean from Mandant. Sean, if you'd like to give a quick introduction around Mandant and yourself, that'd be awesome.
Thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. My name's Sean Liberty. I've been in the SAP and ERP space really for the last 20 odd years, working for both Oracle and SAP. The majority of that time was with SAP. Latterly, I've been working really in the field of sort of managed services for SAP, and I work for a SAP Gold partner called Mandant, who specialise in technical integration and managed kind of operational managed services for SAP.
Excellent, thanks, Sean. We'll go over to Mike. Mike, are you there?
Hi, so I'm Mike, Principal Data Engineer with Claranet. I've been working with data-intensive systems over the last number of years, helping people get the most out of them in the public cloud and sort of using both their data and the public cloud technologies to the best of their ability.
Excellent, thanks, Mike, and welcome to the panel, gents. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's James Linnane. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, I'm a Senior Cloud Specialist here at Claranet. We are an Azure Expert MSP, and we're experts in migrating mission-critical workloads and apps to the cloud. So I guess to start the talk today, we're starting in the knowledge that cloud is no longer an aspiration, it's an expectation. One of the famous recent quotes, Pankaj, from Microsoft in recent months is, we've seen 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, especially as in light of COVID, remote workforces or organizations pivoting to new revenue streams in light of the pandemic. So with this in mind, Sean, I guess we'll start with you. Who is migrating their SAP workloads to cloud right now?
Okay, thanks, James. I guess really a bit of a sort of journey, really, the sort of cloud story in the context of SAP. If I look back to say 5 years ago, as recently as that, whilst in terms of, cloud was broadly accepted, but public cloud from an SAP perspective, that there was a degree of caution, a huge degree of caution actually. If people were moving to cloud, moving their SAP to cloud, it tended to be private cloud. That's certainly what I saw. The organizations that I was working with, much of a reluctance tended to be around data residency, security. There were these perceptions about public cloud then, which I think have certainly, over the last 2 years, have been completely blown away as really the hyperscalers, from my perspective, have really ramped up their sort of focus on SAP and their capability, etc. And of course, also in the broader sense, just the huge scale that they have. I think sort of another dimension to that as well was SAP's own release strategy. Everyone will be familiar with, HANA, S4 HANA, etc. And there was a degree of not necessarily confusion, but okay, what do we do first? For an organization with SAP, it's absolutely a mission critical application. Always treated with a degree of, I was going to say conservatism, but it isn't really that, but it's high risk. So again, if people were exploring cloud, etc., it tended not to be, from my experience, SAP at that particular point in time. And I think with the whole S4 HANA release strategy and the sort of deadline that SAP put out at the time, which is 2025, it kind of people, well, do we embark on an S4 transformation, or do we fully exploit cloud for our SAP now? So it was almost a catch-22, which in some respects people were kind of doing nothing, watching and waiting. I think there was a view generally in the market that SAP would change that as well. They have had a history of doing that, mandating something, and then as pressure, not necessarily pressure, but consultation with their own customers, there's some real dialogue that there's been a look at a look and a review of that, and maybe a more pragmatic option. So with SAP sort of saying, well, really your options are stretch out to 2030 now almost, that it kind of did enable people to focus, okay, what do we really need to do now? What could we do now? What would bring most immediate business benefit, but equally not box us in and prepare a pathway, a route map sort of moving forward. And I think having seen that combination of aspects, that there's real momentum towards public cloud with SAP. I haven't spoken to anyone actually who's looking for private cloud for their SAP estate. It tends to be public cloud, definitely. But I would still say that, SAP is one of the last applications that an organization will move. They'll get a lot of other aspects of their whole IT estate across, prove to themselves what they understand what they're doing, find the right partners, etc., etc., etc. But there's real momentum currently from my perspective.
Thanks, Sean. Pankaj, are you seeing similar momentum? And it'd be good if you could just give us a run through on what are the typical benefits of moving SAP to public cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in line with what Sean has mentioned, the past couple of years, customers had concern around security, data residency, that sort of requirements. However, when we go to the customers or partners now, we kind of we don't see that concern coming into their conversation that often. I mean, it is still a concern. However, they know that they have the right kind of security and compliance in place when it comes to these public cloud providers. In terms of benefit, why they are looking into public cloud solutions, I think the first and the most obvious one is the flexibility and the agility of public cloud. And if you kind of look into this particular point with respect to SAP landscape, within SAP projects, whether it's greenfield implementation or a brownfield implementation, whether you're doing landscape upgrades or additional projects within SAP landscape, there is always this demand for development, test, pre-prod, sandbox, dual landscapes. And what public cloud like Azure provides you is ease of provisioning. So if you want to do something similar on an on-prem landscape, you have to do a lot of designing, sizing exercises for that. And sure, you are planning for 3 to 5 years from now, but when you do something similar on Azure, you are not concerned because you have the right kind of compute and capacity available, right kind of certified VMs available. So kind of helps you out with respect to your business requirements, what we call as ease of provisioning, flexibility, even with things like scalability. So if you have month-end requirements, if you have peak demands because of changing businesses around, you can always scale up, scale out, scale down as well, depending on what is your business requirement. And I mean, continue on the same point, security itself, it's always a big talking point. And when we say that, you look at our security, where we are investing $1 billion every year just for security purposes. We have 3,500 security professionals. We have internal teams hacking. So one team which is hacking Azure, one team which is trying to prevent the hack. And from security perspective, the physical security of the concept of security in all the Azure services, compute, network, storage, apps, and not just that. In fact, integration of all the intelligence coming into Microsoft and looking to mitigate threat faster than anybody else. If you look any further down, think about geographic reach as well. So at the moment, and the last I checked, we had about 56 regions and more coming. And the last I was checking, we have upcoming in Israel, Italy, some of the other places. What it gives you is what it gives your customers or the customers is effectively the same point which Sean mentioned, in terms of data residency requirements, so following the local laws and governance around it. It gives you the capability to build right kind of HA and DR solutions, and really the global reach and to your local audience as well. So these are some of the main kind of reasons why customers looking to moving into cloud solutions.
Excellent, thank you. So we know there's a list of benefits you can get from moving your SAP workloads to cloud, as you mentioned there: geography, security, scalability, agility, the typical things we'd expect with moving workloads to cloud. So what are kind of the potential return on investments that we can see from moving SAP to public cloud, Pankaj?
So return on investment itself is quite a big and varied topic when it comes to different customers. All the different customers, whether it's mainstream, whether it's a small, medium business, whether it's enterprise business, they will have different sizes of landscape and applications as well. What is interesting is we recently released a Forrester report last year where we worked with Forrester to understand the economic impact of Microsoft Azure on SAP solutions. And the interesting thing which came out of it is customers are achieving 102% ROI based on that after a certain time period. So, really looking at avoiding the cost of data center, avoiding the cost of on-prem hardware, as I mentioned about oversizing, avoiding the cost of oversized hardware, faster time to release, that sort of things.
Great, thanks very much. Sean, we'll go to you around the question: how can you make your cloud migration a success? What would be your kind of top tips around that?
Yeah, I think there's some sort of real fundamental basics which probably haven't changed much over time, actually, in terms of success, because I think the real goal is the sort of wider, broader capability that Azure would provide you with from a business perspective. That's the real goal. Again, looking back, move to cloud, often the business case was pretty much purely cost related. People might not have, they would say, we want innovation, etc., those kind of things as well. But it was largely driven by cost. That's certainly what I saw. But certainly, again, over this last 2 years, that's almost a given that there is a cost benefit in that respect. If you're measuring the old world of data centers, hardware procurement, etc., etc. Now you really are into the realms of agility, etc. And if you just look at what's happened over the last few months, it's a very, very new subject, but feeling quite sort of tired as well. Everyone's talking about digital disruption and the whole COVID effect, etc. But actually, the ability to scale up and scale down on the turn of a sixpence or a dime, if you're American, is absolutely huge. There's huge real business benefit in being able to achieve that. And so, but getting back to some of those fundamentals, many of these SAP estates have, customers do truly know what they're doing with their SAP. They've had it for, a decade or more, generally. So they absolutely know what they're doing with their own SAP estate. But again, from experience, I think there are aspects, if you are moving to cloud, and there is that other dimension that I mentioned earlier of HANA, be that database or S4 HANA, there's an awful lot of data, for example, that has accumulated over the years. And again, most customers that I've worked with have always had it in their mind and are aware that probably they needed to do a data archiving project for SAP or address that, but have never really actually bitten the bullet. But now there are real cost benefits of doing that, because HANA in that respect, it isn't cheap. There are cost savings to be made if you do your housekeeping. So I would certainly recommend addressing and at least reviewing, those aspects of your SAP estate before you go to cloud. okay, you could, almost lift and shift, get it to cloud and then address it. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity to really bite the bullet with some of those aspects. Equally, again, it's the time that people have had SAP, generally that their SAP fits them like a glove. And there'd be a degree of customization or Z programs, etc., that exist. And again, it's an opportunity to really review your estate and clean up, tidy up, and be in the best shape possible that you could be to really exploit the benefits of cloud. It's not, maybe some of those points aren't necessarily that cloud related. They're things that you could be doing anyway. It's still be benefits doing that, but it kind of dovetails quite nicely to me that you get those aspects sorted when you move to the cloud.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think what I'm hearing there as well is the move to cloud, a great opportunity to refactor it and reduce technical debt, clean up your infrastructure, but also optimize costs. I think when we look at migrating some of these SAP apps to cloud, what we see here at Claranet is that can lower your infrastructure costs as much as 30 to 50%, as well as freeing up the funding for reinvestment in other growth initiative areas. But I think one question, I'll come back to yourself, Pankaj, is can customers actually take this journey on their own? Have you seen customers do that, or what's the kind of journey that some of these customers go on?
So what we really see is you will always have some sort of partner attached with a particular customer. So either, all the customers will have some sort of managed service provider who is doing the managed services for their SAP technical operations or SAP functional operations, and that's where the conversations usually start when they think about cloud solutions. And then a lot of customers will also analyze who are the partners who have done a lot of work with respect to cloud solutions or migrations, or even the innovation part of it. The customers, I wouldn't say a customer would be able to take this journey on its own. It is possible they might have in-house teams who have certain sort of experience with different cloud solutions, but you still need somebody who is actually going to deliver the migration and have all the security and governance in place across the project. This SAP migration projects are not simple, straightforward projects. There are a lot of interdependencies in between, and there are a lot of different teams involved. So you really need that project governance around these projects as well.
Yeah, sure. And are there scenarios where customers, instead of taking the journey on their own, could potentially go direct to SAP and consume it as a SaaS model?
So for that, I think what we have to understand is what is the SaaS model from SAP. If you look at the SaaS model from SAP, it's only going to have a limited functionality, again, because there's a certain segment, certain industry sector that it caters to. Let's say, for example, SuccessFactors, which is specifically for HR solutions. Let's say, for example, you have single tenant editions from SAP for SAP S/4HANA, which has got limitations in terms of how many times you can do the upgrades or how many times you can add the functionalities throughout the year. So it will really depend on customer basis. Let's say if you have a customer who has been running a lot of SAP applications, they have got ERP, they got process orchestration, supply chain management, enterprise portals, BWs of the houses and everything. Probably that kind of customer wouldn't be able to consume everything off the SaaS application. They might have a case where they are running an SAP HR system, which is the old version, and they think maybe let's move those functionalities to SuccessFactors. So that would be a typical roadmap. So it will depend on technology roadmap from SAP as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Yeah, Sean, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very sort of interesting discussion point, actually, Pankaj. Certainly, again, what we're seeing, if I go back a few years, if people have bought SAP, they tended to want to use SAP A to Z. But again, frequently now, I'm seeing that SAP remains at the core. I think SAP called it the digital core, etc. But increasingly, have seen organizations actually not necessarily moving away from SAP. It's just so fundamental and embedded in their business, but actually when it comes to SaaS applications that support specific business processes, increasingly you're seeing things like Workday used. It could be SuccessFactors, but it could be Workday, which is an SAP competitor. The same with business spend software Coupa. Again, it's kind of seeing a bit of a trend for that. It's not an uncommon scenario, at least let me put it like that. And Salesforce.com, obviously, and I think SAP are in some respects retreating from that CRM space as well. But having said that, that presents different challenges for an SAP customer. You have to integrate these applications to your core mission critical business application, and again, that's something that all those integration points, Pankaj sort of touched on some of the complexities in what in effect are business processes, supply chain and the interface points and the points that you touch outside of your organization. Again, I have seen not necessarily where projects have gone wrong, as it were, but maybe that side of things has been underestimated. So again, I would say that's something to be very clear about, all of those integration points before you embark on a sort of cloud migration project. I think that's absolutely critical.
So we're looking for a partner who can migrate but also integrate with your existing core business apps. Is that right to say, Sean?
I would say so, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, increasingly so as well.
Excellent. So I guess, gents, now we know the importance of an expert partner and who can help outline a structured migration path, but also that seamless service operation once we're actually in the cloud. So what are the common pitfalls that we see seeing customers when they start to take this journey, Pankaj?
In terms of the actual migration, what you have to be careful about is things like assessing the actual SAP landscape. So understand what is your SAP landscape, what are the components, what are their versions, what are the dependencies, because not everything would be available and supported right out of the box. So really having that base layer, understanding of that layer. Think about cleaning your closet, something which Sean touched a little bit. So HANA is expensive. If you can run some archiving projects before and have reduced database sizes, or if there are certain systems that you can get rid of, or certain landscape or certain parts of the landscape. Another important thing to think about is thinking about security and governance. So you might want to have a team in place right from the beginning of the project, which looks after security and governance part of it, so that that part is covered and you don't have any unexpected occurrences in terms of legality of the project itself. Think about your region strategy. Region strategy is extremely important, and there are a lot of factors again in terms of network latency, user density, what is the customer's consumers, so where are they placed? Are they global? Is it a global-based business? Is it a geography-based business? So that kind of factors that goes into picture. Another important thing is think about interdependencies between your SAP systems. So think about the systems which are working closely with each other. So let's say you have an ERP, BW, doing a lot of data transfer between each other. You probably want to move them together. Think about your migration approaches, depending on what kind of migration it is. It could be a homogeneous, heterogeneous, whether you are changing databases, operating systems. So I would probably stick to these common points, which you need to consider before doing the migration.
Okay, thank you. Mike, anything further to add from your perspective around the kind of common pitfalls we see when we do these types of migrations?
Yeah, I think some of the kind of basic hiding gets forgotten about too. That make sure that you updated your backup strategy, that you've tested your backups as well. So just because you've moved to the cloud and there's a whole lot more resiliency available, doesn't mean your backups are in place. So it's make sure that some of those basic things are done. And as she mentioned, the sort of of your old data. there's a huge opportunity to keep the data, yet save on the cost of storing it in SAP, because you can move that into blob storage and then make use of it with other Azure services like Synaptic Data Warehouse. So it's worth considering what your end goal is going to look like, not just, I've moved SAP and I've moved my apps, but what am I going to do with that once I'm there? Where do I want to get to? Because you can start building towards that as you're migrating.
Thanks, Mike. So I think so far we know some of the benefits of moving to public cloud, why customers are taking the journey. Can they do it themselves, and when it's right to go to SAP and include a partner? Then we know some of the kind of common pitfalls that people usually get during these journeys. So once we've completed the migrations and the underlying infrastructure has been fully optimized, we're in cloud, and then the underlying infrastructure has been fully optimized through automation and tooling, we can then begin to start to look at kind of getting the value out of your SAP data and your apps. So Mike, we'll come back to you. Is how once we're in cloud, how can we start to evolve the use of data from there?
Yeah, so there's a wealth of data services that Azure makes available for you, and you can start to move from sort of doing purely descriptive analytics in all of your historic data and start gradually getting more and more real time. The first sort of step to that is to start taking the data as it's arriving in SAP and streaming it out of SAP using services like Databricks or Azure Streams, so that you can analyze the data as it arrives. Now, this can be a huge difference for your business, because instead of looking at things that have happened 24 hours, 48 hours ago, whenever the last time a report was ran, you can now look at things that are happening in your business 5 minutes ago, maybe a minute ago, and make reactionary decisions based on that. So, for example, a retail customer that I'm familiar with, once they started having these near real-time analytics, they were able to detect events such as payment services dropping off in some countries far sooner than they used to be able to, simply because they could see the number of sales drop right away, and they could react, they could deal with it, instead of just kind of going in a blind panic. Now, the nice thing about having streaming analytics is that it's very close to the next step where everybody wants to be right now, which is making use of machine learning. So we've got all of our historic archive data in blob storage. We've got our current data in SAP and other databases. We can use the machine learning services in Azure to build up machine learned models and start making predictions of what might be happening in our business. And the streaming analytics pipeline is a natural place where you can add the inferences in. So as data is arriving, you can go and ask the machine learned model, what's going to happen with this? And so that same retail customer, unfortunately I can't mention their name, otherwise I would have by now, but they were able to determine that they can increase their sales based on the activity of a basket. So as people add things into a basket to make a purchase, they notice that there's quite a drop-off after a certain period of time. And the suspicion is that it's this kind of impulse. So people kind of impulsively adding some stuff into the basket, then sensibility takes over, so they decide not to buy. But actually, if you can detect that that's happening, you can see that in the data, you can entice them by offering them a discount. If you buy in the next half hour, we'll give you, say, 10% off. And suddenly that conversion from just being items in a basket to a sale happens a lot more frequently, and thus, of course, you're making more money.
Great, thanks, Mike. That sounds like a really good example there. Pankaj, it'd be great to hear from yourself around what the specifics that Azure brings to your actual data.
Yeah, I think Mike touched a very good point in this case, mentioning about things like predictive analysis, machine learning, streaming analytics, and all these points are extremely relevant when it comes to SAP data on Azure. So I was reading a survey about 50 to 60% of SAP customers' data sits in non-SAP systems, and not to forget about streaming data, which Mike just mentioned about. So you really need a platform where you can combine these different data sources and then enrich the data, you can do predictive analysis, you can do consume that data. So, services like HD Insight, Databricks, Power BI for consumptions, SQL DB for storing the result of enrichment of data. So all these different services come into point. And if you look at the specific services, we have designed a lot of connectors which connect to SAP applications, and really think from business to business applications. Sean touched a little bit on Workday and Salesforce in the beginning. Imagine you raise a trigger in SAP system, and that sends an email that goes to FedEx or some other application, gets the inventory or the status of the shipment, and then gets back the details to you. So something like Logic Apps is extremely relevant when you want to build that B2B integration. When you say about data and analytics, Power BI is an extremely powerful tool. We have connectors for SAP HANA, BW systems. A lot of our partners are also working to build their products based on all the Azure fundamental services. Think about Azure Data Factory. So if you're looking to build a modern data warehouse, so really combining data from different sources, bringing it in, storing an Azure Data Lake, and then using maybe SQL Synapse, Azure Synapse, or Databricks for transforming the data and then storing on Azure SQL DB or any other enterprise data warehousing places. And then using the different tools like Power BI, not only Power BI, in fact, you can use Teams, you could use chatbots to really do that interaction from the end user perspective. So there's a lot that you can do and achieve when it comes to digital transformation, and you're really entering into enterprise space when you have this data and you combine the other applications from your organization.
So I think we touched on a few of them there from a kind of data perspective, but what would you say the key differentiators are for putting SAP onto Microsoft Azure?
So I kind of think about this question in 3 or 4 different buckets. So let me see if I can recap that. The first and most important from SAP migration perspective, from business perspective, is our extremely strong partnership with SAP. I mean, we have been partners with SAP since 25 plus years, and you might have heard about the latest Embrace announcement, which was announced last year, where SAP is leading with Microsoft Azure as the preferred hyperscaler for S/4HANA transformations. You can have a look at our number of SaaS applications which are available on Azure. In fact, HEC is also available on Azure. You can think about SAP Cloud Platform services, which are available on Azure as well. So when we started last year, we had about 15 services. Now we have about 45 services across 5 different regions. So a lot of customers who have S4HANA or BW4HANA or some of the other SaaS products, they are using SAP Cloud Platform for their integration, innovation, that kind of approaches. So that's, again, a big differentiator. Then look at the industry segment, look at what kind of customers we have. If you are looking at mainstream customers, small, medium businesses, so we have a range of certified VMs available for them, from 192 gigs all the way up to 24 terabyte if I include both HANA large instances and the VM space as well. We have support for Oracle, any customer who is on SAP and with SQL and Windows. So for them, it's extremely beneficial to run their systems on Azure, because when you combine reserve instances with something called as Azure Hybrid Benefit, you could get up to 80% of cost savings. And we have plenty of references in that segment as well. Now, if you look at some of the biggest customers, enterprise customers, we have plenty of references in that side as well. So we kind of do very well in the enterprise space. So if you're looking for customers who have done 15 plus terabytes of migrations, so customers like Rio Tinto, Carlsberg, or even our own internal landscapes, we have a heavy and a big SAP landscape. Think about the surround strategy, which I mentioned, and Mike touched a lot on that point. So a critical point is Azure Active Directory integration. So you can use the same Azure Active Directory. A lot of companies have Office apps. Go to the same Office app space, and you can access Fiori screens. You can get access to NetWeaver. You can not only that, in fact, you can get access to your SAP SaaS services as well, and all those lovely points that we mentioned around digital transformation in terms of connectors.
Excellent, thank you, Pankaj. And obviously aware that Microsoft uses SAP in their estates as well. So can you tell us about Microsoft's own journey through SAP?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a very heavy usage of SAP applications. We have things like, from a business perspective, we have finance, human resources, trade management, a lot of these applications, and also some of the SaaS applications from SAP, so likes of Concur, Ariba, SuccessFactors. In terms of numbers, what you're looking at is we have a global ECC landscape. A lot of different companies might have regional ones, but in our case, we have a global one. We're talking about 17 terabyte of compressed database. In terms of numbers, again, we have in 120K internal users. We produce about 300 million of transaction steps per month. So around 2014, a lot of these systems were, in fact, most of them were on-premise or combination of VMs. Around 2018 February, we have migrated all of these applications and servers on Azure, and I'm talking about around 600 VMs in this case. In terms of migration strategy, we used both horizontal and vertical. So we really started with understanding what are the low-hanging fruits in our landscape. So things like sandbox, which cannot make a business impact. So take the learnings from that, move into the next steps, move to dev QA, step by step. We produce a lot of migration scripts, try to understand what are the landscape difficulties or problems with respect to different components. And not only that, we also did some vertical approach as well. So some of the SAP components which were not extremely business critical, which had very less impact, or which were related to other SAP systems, we moved the entire stack from dev to production system. And then we had learnings from both the different strategies, which helped us to migrate the mission critical production systems quite seamlessly. I'm not saying we didn't have any bumps, but but to be honest, it was a very seamless migration.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of differentiators then for Microsoft Azure, and having been through that journey yourself, you can also help guide customers that are some of the bumps you mentioned there. Customers are always going to go through those. We're all honest and open about that, but it's good to hear from yourself there. So what I'm going to do now is kind of go to the audience for a few questions and bring them back into the panel, gents. So one of the first questions I have here, we'll go to you, Mike, is can you give us a few examples? I know you mentioned your retail example, but can you give us a few examples where you've seen organizations implement a really effective data strategy?
Yeah, so it's the first step really is kind of getting a catalog of all the data that you have. And the beauty of moving everything to the cloud is you've now got that all in one place. And for many people that started this as a journey into data lakes, where we start kind of putting all the data together. Once you've got that, you can start analyzing it and start building out all of these sort of models. But the beauty of doing it in the cloud is that you've got a lot of freedom to experiment. So you can just take the data that you've accumulated, you've either got available through catalogs or through your data lake. You can make a quick prototype, see whether something's going to float or sink, and obviously if it's going to sink, you just jettison it and try again. And so there's a lot more freedom to take advantage of things. And so the most successful people in terms of making use of their data are those that take advantage of that. If you just try and sort of plan everything and very kind of meticulous approach to your data, you don't actually really move much forward than where you are right now, where you've got kind of big data models and you know how those work and you've got all your reports on top of that. Really, it's about taking advantage of the freedom and the flexibility that you've got that really brings the innovation and the success.
Thanks, Mike. And just to the audience, if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them in now, and we'll pose them to the panel. Now's your opportunity to ask the questions. Just looking at a few more that have come through. So, Sean, one we have for you is how important is an effective user management strategy and getting business users on board before actually taking this journey?
Well, I think, yeah, I think it always has been with IT for sure, and you know, many of the, you know, brilliantly successful from a technical perspective SAP implementation that I've seen that maybe fallen flat because there wasn't the user adoption or the buy-in from the business users. I think with cloud it can be, you know, the trap is that you know, business users will see that purely as a kind of IT type project, but as really as both Mike and Pankaj have been describing, you know, the holy grail is what it enables you once you get to the cloud. Yeah, you know, it is an IT technical perspectives and actually getting there, but it's, you know, what is the real reason for doing that? You know, what can you achieve from a business sense and exploit? You know, I was listening with great interest to Mike and that whole retail scenario. You know, I can remember one which involved iPhones and retail, you know, high street retail shops selling out, but the kind of warehouse wouldn't know for 24 hours. So, you know, they were missing out on sales because a customer walks into a shop and, oh, have you got the latest iPhone whatever. Oh no, we haven't. But if you come back tomorrow, well, they just walk, you know, 50 yards up the road and go to a competitor. So, but having sort of, you know, real-time access to those type of analytics and business intelligence makes a huge, and you can translate that to so many, well, most business scenarios and verticals, etc. So for me, that's really where the sort of business aspect and not necessarily user adoption, but, you know, there are certainly things that people can get excited about in the business community, business user community, about what, you know, a move to something like Azure would bring.
Thanks, Sean. I think we'll stay with you. We've got a few more questions here. So obviously, I think we touched on it actually earlier on in the panel, but just the impact of the extension of SAP's business suites to 2030.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a very pragmatic move by SAP. They listen to their customers. I think that's you know, huge credits to SAP. I don't necessarily think there's a huge reluctance by people to go to S4, but it's kind of time and planning, and pretty much as I touched on earlier, what my experience, what people have with their SAP, it's working for them, you know, and the cost of it could be termed a re-implementation to S4. There was some real reluctance to do that, and as I touched on again earlier, the two combined, you know, there's a lot of pressure for CIOs, for example, to get to the cloud, certainly from CFOs. You know, well, what are we doing about them? Why aren't we there? I'm reading about these, you know, certainly cost benefits that can be realized there. But if you're an IT director or responsible for SAP, they're like, but oh my God, you know, I've got practically a whole new implementation to sort of get done in and it might seem like a long while, but in the SAP years, it's not necessarily, well, 2025, it wasn't that long actually. So I feel that pragmatic move by SAP sort of works in almost every scenario. And again, without laboring the point, what I am definitely seeing, and what we're seeing, is that people are looking at cloud first. Okay, let's get that sorted, our cloud strategy. Let's move our SAP to the public cloud, and then get our heads up above the parapet and then start exploiting, you know, the real benefits that S4 will bring as well, in addition to the ones that you will achieve by moving to a public cloud.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks. So I think that's all the questions we have for the panel today, gents. So just thank you for listening today. Hope you've learned something today. And if you did find this information useful, or you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. The details are there for you to get in touch with any of us. Yeah, thanks again for joining.
Thanks.
Thank you.